Welcome to Thoughts and Theories. Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff. Below you is an endless abyss. Behind you is everything you've ever known, your comfort, your logic, your reason, your world. Ahead of you lies something invisible, something you cannot prove, something that might not even exist. And yet, Kierkegaard says that is exactly where faith begins. Søren Kierkegaard, a 19th-century Danish philosopher, is often called the father of existentialism. But unlike Nietzsche, who declared that God is dead, Kierkegaard wrestled with God as if his very soul depended on it. He wasn't interested in proving religion. He wanted to understand what it means to truly believe, when belief itself seems irrational. For Kierkegaard, faith isn't a set of religious ideas you agree with. It's a personal leap into the unknown. And here's the paradox. True faith, he says, requires despair. To have faith, you must first lose everything, including yourself. Let's unpack this. Kierkegaard lived in a world where Christianity had become comfortable. People went to church, said their prayers, and called it faith. But he thought that was fake. To him, real faith is not about comfort. It's about standing before the infinite and realizing your own smallness. It's about confronting the absurd, the impossible, and still choosing to believe. He used a famous story from the Bible to explain this. The story of Abraham and Isaac. God tells Abraham to sacrifice his only son, the very son he had been promised. Logic says this command is cruel. Morality says it's wrong. Emotion says it's unbearable. But Abraham obeys. He walks up the mountain ready to lose everything, even his son. This, Kierkegaard says, is the moment of faith. Abraham cannot explain his act. It makes no sense, yet he trusts. That's what Kierkegaard calls the leap of faith. It's a leap because reason can't take you there. You have to jump, not knowing if anything will catch you. Now, to most people today, especially those who are not religious, this sounds insane. Why would anyone believe something that defies logic? Why would anyone give up reason for faith? But Kierkegaard would argue that it's not about rejecting reason. It's about realizing reason as limits. Think about it. You can explain the world through science, philosophy, or psychology. You can map the universe, study human behavior, understand evolution. But even if you understood everything, could that ever explain why you exist? Why you feel joy, sorrow, guilt, or love? Why you suffer? Why you long for meaning? For Kierkegaard, these are questions logic cannot answer. That's where despair enters. Despair, he says, is not just sadness or depression. It's deeper than that. It's the feeling of being trapped between who you are and who you think you should be. It's the realization that you can never truly control your own existence. You can chase success, pleasure, fame, or even religion, but deep inside, you know something is missing. That emptiness, that disconnection from your true self, is despair. And Kierkegaard believed that every human being feels it, even if they don't admit it. Despair is universal. You can try to escape it through distractions, social media, money, relationships, careers, but it always returns. Because despair is not about what you have or don't have. It's about being separated from the truth of your existence. Now, here's the paradox. The only way to escape despair is to go through it. In despair, you face the reality that you are finite, fragile, and powerless. And in that confrontation, you have a choice. You can sink into nihilism, believing life has no meaning, or you can take the leap of faith. But what does that leap mean if you don't believe in God? For Kierkegaard, faith doesn't have to be about dogma. It's about trust. Trust in something beyond your own control. For him, that was God. But even if you remove the religious layer, the idea still resonates. To live authentically, you must trust something uncertain. Love, purpose, truth, humanity. You must act without guarantees. Let's take a simple modern example. Imagine someone starting a business or creating art or confessing love. They don't know what will happen. They could fail, be rejected, lose everything, yet they still act. That's a kind of leap of faith. Kierkegaard's idea wasn't that everyone should become religious. It was that everyone must face the anxiety of existence. That what he called the sickness unto death, the despair that comes from not wanting to be who you really are, from living for others, for approval, for certainty. Faith, then, becomes an act of courage. It's not blind belief. It's choosing to live fully, even when you cannot see the outcome. Kierkegaard criticized his society because people wanted easy faith, belief without suffering, religion without doubt, God without risk. But he believed that doubt is essential to faith. Without doubt, belief is dead. Without despair, there's no transformation. You could say that Kierkegaard's faith was not about religion, but about existence itself. He said that each person must face their own leap. No one can do it for you. Not the church, not the priest, not philosophy. It's a lonely journey, but also the most honest one. He even said that faith is absurd, because it believes in something that makes no logical sense. But he didn't mean absurd as an insult. He meant it as a recognition of the limits of logic. The absurd is where reason ends and life begins. In that sense, Kierkegaard was the opposite of modern cynicism. He didn't say life is meaningless. He said meaning must be chosen. You can't be given it. You must take the leap yourself. And that's why his ideas still matter today. In a world where people are constantly seeking validation, avoiding pain, and demanding certainty, Kierkegaard reminds us that true living begins when we embrace uncertainty, when we stop hiding behind what's easy or safe and confront the paradox of being human. We live in an age of information but not much faith, in ourselves, in others, in the future. We crave proof before we commit. We want guarantees before we act. But Kierkegaard would say that's not living, that's waiting. And waiting is a form of despair. Faith, in his sense, means stepping forward even when you cannot see the path. It means believing there's something worth living for, even when you can't explain why. Take love, for example. No one can prove love. You can measure hormones, brain activity, behavior, but not the thing itself. Yet people still fall in love. They still marry, sacrifice, hope. That's faith. You can't see where it leads, but you trust it anyway. Or take creativity. Every artist, writer, or thinker begins with nothing. A blank page, an empty canvas, a vague idea. They don't know if their work will succeed or even matter, but they create anyway. That's a leap of faith. In this way, Kierkegaard's philosophy is not about God. It's about courage. The courage to exist without guarantees. The courage to face despair without running from it. The courage to believe in something you can't fully understand. He once said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." That's the paradox of faith and despair. We can only make sense of life after we've lived it, but we must live it before we understand. Kierkegaard's own life was full of contradictions. He was deeply religious but critical of the church. He was engaged but broke off his marriage to dedicate himself to philosophy. He was lonely, misunderstood, and often mocked. Yet through his suffering, he found something profound, that despair itself can awaken faith. In the end, Kierkegaard teaches us that despair is not a flaw to fix. It's a sign of depth. To despair is to be human. To have faith is to be brave enough to live despite that despair. We don't have to believe in God to understand Him. We only have to recognize the same struggle within ourselves, the need for meaning in a meaningless world, the longing for truth in a world of noise, the courage to leap when reason tells us not to. So maybe Kierkegaard wasn't just talking about religion. Maybe he was talking about all of us, about what it means to be alive, uncertain, afraid, and yet still capable of faith, Not blind faith in dogma, but faith in life itself. Because in the end, the paradox of faith and despair isn't about choosing one over the other. It's about realizing they belong together. You cannot have faith without despair, and you cannot rise without first falling. That's what it means to be human. That's what Kierkegaard wanted us to see.